In the quiet valley of Tennessee, Bend, 1873, life moved like the slow drift of the river that curved around the town. Dust clung to the boots of farmers. Hymns echoed faintly on Sunday mornings, and the air often smelled of wood smoke and cotton. But on the far edge of town stood a hill, Silent Hill, they called it now, where the once proud St. Miriam's Chapel leaned against the wind, abandoned and aching. No one went there anymore, not since the fire. It had been 20 years since lightning struck the steeple during a summer storm. The roof caught fire, and though the rain followed quickly after, it was too late. A young girl, Clara Whitmore, the preacher's only child, had been trapped inside. Her father, Reverend Elias Whitmore, arrived too late to save her. That night, something in him broke. He left before dawn, walking out of Tennessee Bend with nothing but a Bible and the smell of ashes in his clothes. Since that day, the church bell had remained silent, and the hill earned its name. Time turned the chapel into a skeleton of memory. Weeds climbed its steps. The once white walls peeled to gray. Inside, dust settled on pews where families once prayed, and the bell rope hung torn, swinging slightly whenever a storm rolled in. The townsfolk spoke of the church in hushed tones. Some said Clara's spirit still lingered there, seen as a pale glow near the altar. Others swore that candles placed on the pulpit refused to light, as though God himself had withdrawn his blessing. Yet every evening the sunset painted the chapel gold, as if heaven hadn't given up on it completely. In October of that year, a wagon arrived in Tennessee Bend just as twilight fell. The driver, an old man with white hair and weary eyes, stepped down slowly, leaning on a carved cane. "Evening," said the blacksmith, watching him curiously. "You passing through?" The man smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But tell me, does St. Miriam's still stand?" The blacksmith hesitated, then nodded. "Barely." "Why?" The old man's smile deepened, tinged with sorrow. "Because," he said softly, "some places aren't done speaking yet." By the next morning, the whole town knew Elias Whitmore had returned. Some were glad, some were frightened, all were curious. That evening, as Elias climbed Silent Hill with a small wooden box in his hands, a shadow followed him from a distance. It was Samuel Hart, a boy of 12, barefoot and curious. Samuel worked odd jobs at the general store, sleeping in the hayloft behind it. He'd never known his parents. They'd drowned in the flood 2 years back, but he often dreamed of a warm light that kept him safe. From the bushes, Samuel watched the preacher push open the chapel doors. The creak echoed through the valley. Then Elias entered and lit a single candle on the altar. But Samuel's eyes widened. The candle did not burn, no flame, no smoke, just a steady golden glow as though light itself had been trapped inside the wax. He stumbled back, heart racing. "The stories were true," he whispered. "The church really is haunted." Elias knelt before the glowing candle, his voice barely above a breath. "I lost her in fire, Lord. Maybe you'll let me find her in light." He closed his eyes and began to pray. A warm glow filled the chapel, spreading across the altar until 6 candles burned, each one shining without flame. Outside, the night wind howled, but inside, everything was still. From his hiding place at the window, Samuel felt something stir in his chest. It wasn't fear, it was peace. He wanted to run, but he couldn't. The sight of that old man bathed in golden light felt like watching a miracle unfold. When Elias finally rose and left, Samuel crept inside. The candles still glowed softly. He reached out to touch one, but it wasn't hot. Instead, it pulsed gently, like the heartbeat of something living. He whispered to the empty air, "How do you burn without fire?" By morning, Samuel's secret was no secret. He told the baker's wife, who told the blacksmith, who told the mayor. Within hours, the entire town buzzed with stories of the preacher's witchlight candles. At the town hall, Mayor Higgins slammed his hand on the table. "We won't have ghostly tricks in this town, not after what happened 20 years ago." Old Widow Marlene shook her head. "You think it's trickery? That man lost everything. Maybe he found something the rest of us forgot." The mayor frowned. "Faith doesn't make candles burn without fire." Marlene smiled sadly. "And yet, here we are still talking about it." That night, townsfolk gathered at the base of Silent Hill, watching the chapel's faint golden glow. None dared climb closer. As dusk fell, Widow Marlene made her way up the hill alone. Inside, Elias was repairing a pew, his hands steady despite his years. "You always were brave," he said without looking up. "And you always were stubborn," she replied. She sat down, clutching her shawl. "Elias, I never told you the truth about that night. It wasn't the lightning alone. The roof had rotted. We'd begged the mayor for money to fix it, but he said God would provide. He didn't. We didn't. Clara paid the price. Elias stopped working. His face softened with pain, but his eyes held no anger. "I knew," he said quietly. "God didn't take Clara. Neglect did. And I left not to curse this town, but because I couldn't bear to see what love had cost me." Marlene wept. "Why come back after all these years?" He looked toward the altar, where one candle glowed softly. "To remind everyone that love never truly dies," he said. "It just waits for us to see its light again." Later that night, Samuel gathered his courage and entered the chapel again. Elias was sitting in a pew, humming an old hymn. The candles still burned with their strange, soft light. "Sir," Samuel asked timidly, "why do they glow like that?" Elias smiled kindly. "Because they burn with what we bring to them. Not with fire, but with what's inside us. Faith, sorrow, love, hope. Each light is born of a heart that refuses to die." He gestured for Samuel to step closer. "Try it," he said, handing him a small unlit candle. Samuel held it in his trembling hands. "But I don't know how," Elias chuckled. "You already do. Just remember someone you miss." The boy thought of his parents, their laughter, the lullabies, the warmth of their arms, and suddenly, the candle began to glow faintly in his hands. His eyes widened in wonder. Elias nodded. "See? You're not alone, boy. None of us are. We just forget where to look." By dawn, news spread again, this time carried by those who'd seen the light for themselves. Half the town climbed the hill, eager to witness the miracle. Elias welcomed them inside. "This place was built for all," he said simply. The townspeople gathered, whispering as he prayed aloud. The candles on the altar began to glow again, each one soft and golden. Gasps filled the room. Some knelt, others stared in disbelief. Mayor Higgins, standing at the back, crossed his arms. "It's some trick," he sneered. "Hidden wires. Chemicals." At his words, the lights flickered and dimmed until the chapel darkened once more. Elias opened his eyes and said quietly, "Light and faith cannot live where mockery dwells." The townspeople left one by one, unsettled and thoughtful. Only Samuel remained. "Will they ever believe?" he asked. Elias smiled faintly. "When they're ready to see, they will." That night, the boy returned again, drawn by something he couldn't name. Elias sat by the altar, reading from his Bible. "Couldn't sleep?" the preacher asked gently. Samuel hesitated. "I don't really sleep much anymore. I keep hearing the river, from the night it took them." Elias set the Bible aside and looked at him with kind eyes. "Your parents?" Samuel nodded. "I prayed for God to save them, but he didn't. So I stopped praying." Elias leaned forward, voice soft but firm. Sometimes the answer isn't rescue, it's endurance. You're still here, Samuel. That means your prayer was answered in a different way. The boy's eyes welled up. Then what am I supposed to do now? Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, unlit candle. He placed it in Samuel's hands. When your heart is ready, he said, light it without fire. You'll know how Samuel looked at the candle, confused but comforted. For the first time in years, he felt warmth, not from flame, but from hope. The air turned heavy in Tennessee Bend. By late November, dark clouds began to roll over the hills again, the same kind that had once brought ruin to the town and taken Clara Whitmore's life. Samuel stood outside the chapel, watching the sky flash in the distance. He felt it in his bones, the same fear that haunted the stories told in whispers for decades. Elias, kneeling at the altar, didn't flinch when thunder cracked. He only said, "Storms come to test what peace we've made, Samuel." This one feels like the final test. Rain started to fall, fat and cold. The townsfolk barred their windows and prayed silently. But the boy and the old preacher stayed inside the church, the candles glowing softly in defiance of the dark. Elias turned to him and said, "If the wind comes hard, remember, faith isn't in wood or stone. It's in what we do when everything breaks outside." The river began to rise. The storm raged through the night. Lightning slashed across the sky like a knife, and the steeple swayed with a groan. Samuel and Elias tried to secure the doors as the wind howled through the broken windows. Then came the sound that froze Samuel's heart, a long cracking creak from above. Elias looked up. "The beam!" he shouted. Before Samuel could move, the roof gave way. A massive timber broke loose and crashed down toward the altar. Elias threw himself forward, shoving Samuel out of the way. The beam struck his shoulder, pinning him to the floor. "Elias!" the boy cried, rushing to his side. The preacher's breath came shallow and labored. "Run, Samuel! Save yourself!" But Samuel shook his head, tears cutting through the soot on his face. "Not this time. You told me faith is what we do when everything breaks. I'm not leaving you." Lightning illuminated the chapel for a brief moment, casting the boy in a halo of light. Then, clutching the small candle Elias had given him weeks ago, Samuel held it high. "Please," he whispered, "please, light." And it did. The moment Samuel's candle began to glow, a brilliant warmth filled the chapel. The flameless light spread from his hands to the candles on the altar. One by one they came alive, soft, golden, pulsing with something deeper than fire. The glow expanded until the entire church was bathed in it. Through the broken windows, townsfolk below saw the golden light shining through the storm, steady as sunrise. "What in heaven?" someone whispered. "It's the chapel," said Widow Marlene, clutching her shawl. "It's burning, but not burning." The crowd hurried up the hill through wind and rain. By the time they reached the doors, the storm had begun to quiet. Inside, Samuel knelt beside Elias, surrounded by the miracle glow. The light didn't scorch or flicker, it simply was. And then, silence. The storm broke. The rain eased into a gentle drizzle. Tennessee Bend had been spared. The townsfolk lifted the heavy beam and freed Elias, but he was pale, his breath thin. Samuel clutched his hand. "Stay with me," he begged. Elias smiled weakly, eyes reflecting the golden light. "I told you, faith isn't in the wood or the roof, or even in me. It's here." He placed a trembling hand over the boy's heart. "It's in you, Samuel." The townspeople stood in reverent silence. For the first time, even the mayor knelt, tears in his eyes. The glow around the altar shimmered like sunlight on water. Elias turned his gaze toward the candles. "You see," he whispered to the crowd, "the light never left this place." We did. His hand fell still. The glow brightened once more, as if heaven itself had come to carry him home. Samuel wept into his hands. But even through grief, the chapel remained full of light. By morning, the skies were clear. The town of Tennessee Bend gathered at the hill, staring in awe at the chapel that had survived the storm once again. The candles still burned without fire. Not one had melted, not one had dimmed. Inside, Samuel knelt where Elias had fallen, exhausted but peaceful. Widow Marlene approached quietly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "He's gone, isn't he?" she whispered. Samuel nodded. "But he left something behind." Word spread across the valley like wildfire. People who had long lost their faith found themselves praying again, some for the first time in years. Mayor Higgins stood outside the chapel, removing his hat. "We called it cursed," he said softly. "But maybe it was waiting for us to believe again." That Sunday, for the first time in 2 decades, hymns rose once more from St. Miriam's Hill. Weeks passed. The town worked together to rebuild what was lost. The mayor, humbled and newly faithful, raised funds to repair the steeple. The blacksmith forged a new bell, inscribed with the words, "The light that never dies." On Christmas morning, Samuel, now living with Widow Marlene, was given the honor of ringing it. He climbed the new steeple, rope in hand, heart pounding. As he pulled, the bell sang across the valley, pure, deep, and beautiful. The sound echoed over the river, through the cotton fields, all the way to the edges of town. And below, the chapel glowed softly as the candles continued to burn without flame, like a promise kept. While cleaning the chapel weeks later, Samuel discovered something beneath the altar, a weathered Bible with Elias Whitmore's name on the inside cover. Between its pages was a folded letter, written in the preacher's careful hand. It was addressed simply, "To the people of Tennessee Bend." Samuel gathered the townsfolk that Sunday and read it aloud. "If ever the light returns to this church, let it be not of wax or fire, but of hearts united in faith and forgiveness. The truest fire of God is carried not by hands, but by hearts willing to love even after loss." When he finished reading, no one spoke. The mayor wiped his eyes. Widow Marlene whispered, "He knew the light would come back." And deep inside, Samuel felt a warmth that words could not name. As months turned to years, travelers began to visit Tennessee Bend, drawn by rumors of the church whose candles burned without flame. Some came as skeptics, others as believers. But all left changed. Samuel, now older and wiser, would greet them kindly, showing the candles that never melted. "They're not meant to prove anything," he'd say. "They're meant to remind us that faith can't be extinguished." Before each traveler left, Samuel would give them a small piece of wax taken from one of the sacred candles. "It will glow," he'd tell them, "when you remember what truly matters." And sometimes, far away in other towns, people claimed they saw their little wax pieces flicker gently in the dark, without fire, without smoke, whenever they prayed, forgave, or loved someone they had once turned away from. Years passed, and Samuel became the new preacher of St. Miriam's. His voice carried peace. His eyes held wisdom far beyond his age. Then, one spring, the river rose again. Heavy rains threatened to flood the valley. The townspeople gathered in fear, memories of old tragedies clawing at their hearts. Samuel walked to the riverbank carrying one of the chapel's sacred candles. The people followed, trembling. He knelt in the mud, holding the glowing candle toward the water. "Lord," he prayed, "if this light is truly yours, let it guide us once more." The candle's glow spread across the water, shimmering like liquid gold. Slowly, the rushing river began to calm. the current bending away from the town. The flood receded. When the people looked again, Samuel's candle was still glowing in his hands, untouched by wind or rain. That night, they called it the light in the river, and faith returned to Tennessee Bend stronger than ever before. Many years later, long after Samuel had grown old and passed peacefully, the chapel still stood on Silent Hill. Time weathered its walls, but the candles upon its altar continued to burn softly without flame. Travelers who visited said they felt something there, an invisible warmth, a quiet peace. Some said they saw a faint figure kneeling near the altar. Others swore they heard a child's laughter echoing faintly through the pews. But everyone agreed on one thing. The light in St. Miriam's Chapel was unlike any other. No matter how dark the world became, it never faded. And on the altar, carved into the wood for all to see, were the words Elias Whitmore had spoken before his death. The light that never dies is the one we give away. The church became a symbol of forgiveness, a place where people came not to see a miracle, but to remember that even in loss, love endures. Generations later, when the name of Tennessee Bend was nearly forgotten on maps, locals still told the story of the church where candles burned without flame, and of the boy who learned that the smallest light, born from faith and love, can outlast even the fiercest storm.